Hello all, I'm Carrie and welcome to my channel. This video is all about my pink Regency gown, which I'm calling my ice cream strawberry ice cream alligator inauguration gown because it looks a little like ice cream. I finished it on inauguration day and I was originally inspired to make this gown when I stumbled across Ruth Martin's version of a fashion plate 1610 from Costume Parisian. I was in a pumpkin cheesecake induced daze on Thanksgiving night, and scrolling through Pinterest as one does, I found this bizarre fashion plate, which I immediately screenshot and shared in my Instagram stories. On Black Friday, I checked my IG notifications and found that Samantha at Couture Courtesan let me know that the alligator fashion plate was actually an art print by Ruth Martin. Shoo! I was relieved Regency women didn't actually use American alligators as shawls and decided to pretend the alligator was still alive and the woman in the print was just a badass with an alligator friend. As penance for not doing my research, Cynthia, and because I'm fascinated by Ruth Martin's work, I decided to do a historical cosplay of her art print. Perhaps I was still cheesecaked. Anyway, I googled pink dotted cotton, and one of my favorite fabric sources popped up with this fabric, and I didn't look too closely before buying 6 yards and posting to IG that I was looking to make this look, including a crocheted alligator. We will see if that happens. Then I had some tea and wondered if I had just made a terrible mistake. I ordered quite a few things that weekend and many were stuck in USPS purgatory for weeks, but my pink fabric actually came right away. And what I thought was the weave of the cotton was actually a print of a weave. Oh well, it's still pretty and pink and super soft and lovely, and this is all for fun, right? I originally thought I'd try to replicate the gown in the fashion plate exactly, but as I went along, my own taste and wild ideas intruded on that notion, and I started conflating the alligator in the print with the dress itself. Don't worry, this is part 1 of 4 videos and I will eventually make an alligator friend, but I ended up making this gown a lot sharper too. I started by making a bodice strip out of the fabric so it would not get super twisted in the laundry machine. I learned this trick from Noelle at Costuming Drama, and I have to lay out my fabric on my kitchen table to cut out large skirt pieces. Can you see Rascal the Cat? Laughing Moon pattern 126 is my favorite Regency pattern thus far. And this being the 4th time I've used it, I pretty much ignored the instructions and sewed intuitively. This means I made mistakes, like the fact that the fabric has a directional pattern and the back skirt panels are not the same direction as the front one, but whatever. I made view B with several modifications. I know I am supposed to sew each bodice seam and then press it before moving on to the next, but I like to pin them all, sew them all, then press them all. I have no idea if this actually saves time. Someday I will do an experiment and see. I did hand sew most of the visible top stitching. Here I am using beeswax from Penny River Costumes to condition my pink thread, then stitching the neckline. Susan helped me put in the drawstring of the bib. She is a sweet cat to me, but not to her sisters. The sleeve heads and bodice are not visible in the fashion plate, so I added some details, including petal oversleeves with piping. To do this, I took the pattern piece from Laughing Moon pattern 138 and modified it to go over the puff sleeve on pattern 126. First, I traced the puff sleeve on cereal box cardboard and then overlaid the petal oversleeve pattern piece from 138 and extended it to cover the entire top of the puff sleeve. Then I had a new pattern piece. Done. Done. Dunna, 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 dunna. To make piping, I cut bias strips from scrap fabric. They are not exactly on the bias, but this fabric is so thin and workable, I don't think it mattered. And I wanted to use up the scrap. I sewed the strips together, finger pressed them because I couldn't be bothered to turn on the iron, and then sewed in some yarn with my zipper foot while on a Zoom call with costuming friends. So much piping. I decided to hand sew the piping to the oversleeves because I was scared I would screw it up. To do this, you put the sleeve and facing right sides together with the piping in between, raw edge sticking out, and clipped to go around tight curves. I used a back stitch at times and sometimes a running stitch. It was fun to turn it right side out and see if my arduous experiment even worked. After pressing them, I placed the oversleeves on the puff sleeves and treated them as one, including to gather. I do 2 lines of gathering stitches within the seam allowance and with a stitch length of 5. Just don't cross the stitch lines or you won't be able to gather them.
I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.
Why?
It would be bad.
I'm fuzzy on the whole good-bad thing.
I put piping on the sleeve band too, but I only needed 1 line of piping because the other half of the band is on the inside of the sleeve. So I had to seam rip one off. Emma sat in my lap while I did this. I'm here to tell you to do as I say and not as I do. Do not seam rip with a cat in your lap. You could poke the cat in her eye. No cats were harmed in the making of this video. Then just fold the piping over and that's the top of the sleeve band. I did not flatline the lining to the sleeve fashion fabric so that I could turn it over at the seam with the bodice and whip stitch it by hand to create a nice finished edge on the inside of my sleeve. I zigzag stitched all of the skirt panels and pleated the back, then sewed the skirt panels together and the bodice to the skirt. I do all of this before sewing the bib front to the skirt front so that I can fit the darts exactly on my body. Don't pin your boob, ouch. I ended up covering the bib with pleated decoration, but I still think this process helps with fit. Then I sewed the bib to the skirt front and attached the ties, or I should say 1 tie. I only make 1 and put it over the bib front seam to finish it. This works because the fabric is thin and I need extra fluff in the bust area anyway. Then I zoomed the tie through my machine because to heck with hand sewing all visible stitches. The pink thread sort of blends in with the fabric anyway. I decided the bib front is too boring, so I tried the pleated bodice front I used with my Regency witch dress. I wanted to see how it would look with light colored fabric. I started with a 27-inch piece of fabric, 16 inches wide, a little wider than the bib, folded over and stitched at the top and bottom edges, and pleated it down lengthwise to 6.5 inches, which is the length of the bib. I used cotton tape as a pleating guide and used the halving method to figure out where the pleat should go. I then took a piece of fabric the width of the sleeve band, stitched piping at both long edges, and folded that over the center of the pleated fabric, drawing it in a bit to give a sweetheart neckline. But not really, because it is going over the bib, which goes straight across, and I don't have to worry about wardrobe malfunctions of the Janet Jackson variety. Instead of lacy ruffles at the end of the long sleeves like in the fashion plate, I decided to make pointier trim because I had alligators on my mind. I took the skirt trim template from Laughing Moon 138 and made it smaller, 1 row 2.5 inches from straight edge to point, and one 3.5 inches. I made the facings for each row the exact same size, sewed them right sides together on my machine because I was tired of piping around corners, and then when they were right sides out and pressed, I ran gathering stitches at the top. Gathered them and sewed them to the end of the long sleeves. Oh, and I had to recut one of the long sleeves because of the directional pattern, and I was not okay with that level of asymmetry. When finished, the sleeves look a bit like a Demogorgon from Stranger Things, and I love them.
Is it dead? Get the red rocket now! Go! Get the red rocket out now!
Now for the skirt trim. I used the original template from Laughing Moon 138 and made the facings the exact same size. Cutting out all these little triangles left me with a pile, and I think I might try to make a toothy reticule next week. Then it was back and forth to stitch the trim by machine, and I had to make a lot more piping to go along with the straight edge. I entertained myself by watching Baby Yoda. I mean, the Mandalorian. Here's another method I use to sew bias strips together. It's good enough, and oh, by the way, I love friction markers much better than pens. My friend Sandy clued me into these. I sewed on 2 lines of trim to the skirt after sewing the piping to the trim. Technically, I could have done this all in one step, but I was nervous about piping getting wonky and moving around while I sewed. I just folded over the piping and stitched in the ditch to attach the lower line of the trim. I had to go slow to stay in the ditch, so for the second row of trim, I did not fold over the piping, made sure the triangles pointed up the skirt, and stitched on the same line I made when I stitched the piping to the toothy trim. Then I flipped the trim down and it looked fine. I did not do a good job of finishing the ends of the trim at the back of the skirt, and I will go back and do that. Maybe. Maybe not. But before I could figure out exactly where to put the hooks and thread loops on the bib front, I needed to put the entire gown on over all underpinnings. I did not get footage of me putting on my stays because it's not PG, thanks to my ridiculously thin linen shift, and it would have just been 5 minutes of me struggling to thread my stays using an upholstery needle anyway. I couldn't find my busk, so there is lift but no separation, like you should see with the Regency. Also, I have dance music on because this was Inauguration Day and I was celebrating. My bodice petticoat is from another Laughing Moon pattern, and I really need to make one that does not button in the back, but instead gathers in the front, because I am not always. This chemisette is a placeholder until I can make one more like the chemisette in the fashion plate. That will be my next video in this series. This one that I'm putting on is from the American Duchess Guide to 18th Century Dressmaking, which I did not make correctly, but I love it anyway. I don't know if Regency women stepped into their gowns or pulled them over their heads. I usually step in mine so I can avoid messing up my hair. My bangs are fake, and I have directions for making them in my Instagram feed from December 2019, I think. Lots of ties to tie at the bodice lining underneath the bib, and this gives you a nice foundation to which to actually pin the bib when you're ready to. I did not notice Tinkerbell eating a string from the fabric behind me until she had about a foot of it down her gullet. Why are cats so gross? Here I pin the bib to my bodice, but later I sew on hooks and thread loops. I also forgot to flip the tie up under the bib, which is why it is a little wonky on my left side. As you can tell from my twirling, I love this gown. It makes me think of strawberry oat milk ice cream, which I hope Aldi's carries again this summer because it is my absolute favorite. And this is my favorite bib front gown, my strawberry alligator inauguration gown. If you are going outside, no Regency woman's ensemble is complete without a bonnet and gloves to protect the skin from the elements. Bridgerton. Now on to the chemisette and a reticule. If you like this video and want to see more, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Please let me know what creative endeavor you are working on in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Bye.